Welcome to the PBIS Fundamentals Learning Series module, Faculty Involvement, TFI Feature 1.10. We always begin with a shared understanding of what Positive Behavioral Interventions and Supports, PBIS, is in Virginia Beach. Anchored to Goal 2 within our strategic framework, PBIS focuses on the goal of student well-being. PBIS is a data-informed decision-making framework for establishing the social culture and behavioral and academic supports needed for a school to be an effective learning environment for all students. Now, every goal within the strategic framework has an embedded equity emphasis. Within Goal 2, we're focused on engaging in culturally responsive practices division-wide. We identify and address inequities in discipline practices by investigating as well as implementing best practices and seeking those innovative solutions. Through PBIS, Virginia Beach City Public Schools has had a desire to move toward equitable discipline as well as fostering those positive school climates. Through the use of a tiered framework, PBIS provides support for all at the Tier 1 level, some at the Tier 2 level, and a few at the Tier 3 level. Tier 1 involves several core components or supports, as you see here on the right of this slide. Across all tiers, we support future-ready skills as well for all students in these areas. Today, in this learning module, our learning intentions are to understand the importance of faculty involvement within PBIS implementation. We'll also explore some ways to share data and progress with teachers in order to promote transparency and relevance within the PBIS implementation process. We also will identify some options for gaining critical teacher input, specifically on certain components of school-wide supports. Our Tier 1 professional learning roadmap guides us through the core features within Tier 1 support, with 1.8, as always, including the 8 classroom practices listed here on the bottom right. In this module, we will focus on feature 1.10, which involves sharing data intentionally with faculty. 1.10, faculty involvement, involves the sharing of data regularly with faculty and offering them the opportunity to provide that input on universal foundations at least every 12 months. And you see here those universal foundations are those school-wide expectations, acknowledgement, as well as some of those problem behavior definitions and consequences as well. Take a moment to read the rubric here on the right, corresponding to a score of either 2, 1, or 0. Important points shared in the brief shown here on the right are helpful to any school with regard to staff buy-in, particularly high schools. A few points shared in this brief include actions teams can take to cultivate staff ownership, as well as investment in PBIS implementation, particularly taking the time to show how PBIS supports those goals defined within the school's vision and priorities. Also working to align PBIS with some of the other initiatives you have in your school, as well as other classroom activities. And then communicating clearly how PBIS meets specific needs of classrooms, as well as the school, by sharing data trends, both before as well as after PBIS team action plans. This resource here will be shared in the Essential Learning series as well. Along these lines, research has also shown that the single factor most related to high sustainability of PBIS is the frequency with which staff are shown data. In the same brief shown earlier, several strategies are outlined for ongoing communication and data sharing. Identifying the process through which PBIS-related information will be shared with teachers and school staff is crucial. Thinking about who the key leaders in the building and bringing them along to inform how PBIS is being implemented is also very important. Possibly also thinking about holding open PBIS meetings so that staff can join and offer input, or possibly offering them the opportunity to add agenda items before those monthly meetings. So what does this actually look like on the school level? This graphic reflects the flow of data sharing and problem solving that could occur at the school level. The Tier 1 team plans school-wide and class-wide supports, and then those get directly communicated to grade level teams and at staff meetings, or possibly at content level team meetings. You will want to consider how this will work at your school. When might be the best time to share and brainstorm with teachers and other staff groups? Here is one tangible way to share success that we are already familiar with. Sharing visuals with staff monthly, asking for their input on what is working or needs more attention. And now we have shifted much of this communication to the electronic format through various platforms. However, at times there is value in tangible visual communication, as you see here. This is an example from Salem Elementary, a highlight called Growing the Green that they previously shared in their newsletter to staff each month. They used a monthly newsletter format to provide data to staff and give them an opportunity to reflect. This is a great communication tool that also encourages requesting assistance from coaches and team members and being clear with staff about how they can request that assistance. Indian Lakes PBIS team lead, Ashley Thompson, shared the TFI process and results with staff this year via an informative Loom presentation. She made the process easy to understand and highlighted specific examples with visuals and celebrated areas of growth in a user-friendly format. Sharing fidelity results and eliciting feedback from stakeholders is an important part of what PBIS teams do. First Colonial staff member Jennifer Hill created an outstanding collection of resources for staff, and they refer to it as their SEL toolkit. That toolkit offers SEL lessons, inclusive activities, professional learning opportunities that align with PBIS, SEL, as well as culturally responsive practices. Some of those SEL strategies that were shared there were staff created. SEL strategies for any class, also for specific content areas as well. Or the staff shared sample learning plans with SEL activities embedded. The SEL Student Corner had some student suggested SEL strategies. Students were given a 2-question survey in their English classes, for example. They were asked what makes their classes amazing, what makes them want to be in class, and what would they like to see in class to help them feel a sense of belonging. There was some student input that they received, sharing why do they feel they belong here at FC. Students were asked in the 2-question survey to explain why they feel a sense of belonging at First Colonial. And then there were some division SEL resources shared, some links to division level resources and professional learning opportunities aligned with PBIS, SEL, and culture responsive practices. Kempsville Middle School PBIS Administrator Allison Farnsworth developed a unique way to consolidate important information regarding behavior data and PBIS practices, as you see here. In each weekly newsletter, she included links to professional development support, discipline data, acknowledgement data, and other relevant PBIS resources. In that way, data and information is always accessible to staff. A fun way of sharing with staff includes student involvement. Faculty involvement often increases when we include staff acknowledgement. Here, Green Run High School students launched a Twitter takeover campaign where they tweeted about staff who had helped to support them in the Stallion Way. They continued to celebrate staff by inviting both staff and students to a school-wide Stallion Way celebration. And so much of what has been just shared involves how to communicate with staff about the work of PBIS. However, it's important to understand the difference between involvement and engagement. Involvement implies doing to. In contrast, engagement implies doing with. A school striving for involvement often leads with its mouth in identifying projects, needs, and goals, and then telling stakeholders how they can contribute. A school striving for engagement, on the other hand, tends to lead with its ears, listening to what stakeholders think, dream, and worry about. The goal of engagement is not to serve clients, but to gain partners. And that information is shared in an article titled Family Involvement versus Family Engagement. And that will be shared in the Essential Learning series as well. CFR Feature 110 refers to the sharing of data with faculty 4 times a year. However, it also asks, how have we asked them for feedback at least once a year as well? Here you see an example of a post check a PBIS team did with their teachers to gauge progress of PBIS, and also look at those growths and strength areas in specific school locations as well. Universal PBIS foundations include expectations, acknowledgements, definitions, and consequences. Here are some ways schools have gotten feedback from their staff along the way. In addition to assessing how effective professional development and trainings are, soliciting ongoing routine feedback is important to maintain buy-in and support from staff. On the right, you'll also see an example of feedback regarding positives as well as questions regarding some of the practices that were being put in place. Take a moment to view some of the sample staff Google Forms that have been used in our division to gather critical feedback from staff. Here, you'll hear a walkthrough of 3 staff surveys.
Here are several sample surveys that were shared with staff at schools across Virginia Beach. This one here was shared with an elementary school staff to get feedback on various areas to inform work that the PBIS team wanted to engage in the next school year. So you can see this was shared back in 2019. And so you can see they asked about what best practices supported the staff this year, what behaviors did they target when using a group contingency within the classroom to reinforce a specific behavior during a certain period of time in the classroom. You can see several here popping up. You can see others that teachers used to target during the year to reinforce behaviors during a certain time in their classroom. So this provided a great opportunity to gather information about what behaviors were a focus for the teachers, which could provide some information for the team moving forward in the future, in the upcoming school year. Here they wanted to know the effectiveness of the matrix for certain areas across the school that supported them, if they needed revisions for certain matrices. Here we have some open comments for the matrix or different matrices for different areas. You can see that they were able to gather feedback regarding how effective the matrix was for different areas of the building. And then here, how effective was the acknowledgement, the opportunities for acknowledgement that they had that past school year. So they looked at assemblies, certain acknowledgement systems they had, such as the I Own It campaign or kindness challenge. And then they got some feedback about the behavior observation form, as well as classroom and office managed behavior. They also wanted to gather some information about contact with families, and that provided some information regarding how often teachers communicated with families as they documented some of those behaviors on the behavior observation form. They also wanted to get some perception. They didn't want teachers to feel that by documenting some of those lower level behaviors on the behavior observation form, they wanted to gauge how teachers perceived they were seen by documenting those behaviors as well. And then they also wanted to get feedback on the discipline flow chart as well. And then they wanted to make sure they gauged staff support. Did they feel like teachers were receiving adequate support through PBIS, as well as coaching? that they received in various capacities. Then they gauged some support that the PBIS team provided regarding Tier 2 related to check-in, check-out. They wanted to make sure that they wanted to gauge how well teachers understood check-in, check-out, and when a student qualifies to receive support for check-in, check-out, how students were perceiving check-in, check-out, and any possible suggestions as well. And what would we like to celebrate about PBIS at that particular elementary school? So that was great feedback they were able to gauge as well. And then what training and support do they feel like they would need regarding behavior in the classroom? And then just general perception of PBIS. So this provided some great feedback. So this was a very comprehensive survey shared out at the end of that particular school year. And then here is a middle school staff survey that was shared that can be also used for high school. They gauged what grade level the teacher was when they responded, what grade level they supported, which could have been multiple grade levels at this particular school. They gauged what behaviors they had to really reinforce more so during that school year within the classroom, different areas in the school. How confident were the staff in distinguishing between classroom and office managed behaviors, specific behaviors that were a problem that year. Function of behavior or motivational behavior they observed. General perception about proactive supports as well as what teachers were doing to be proactive within the classroom. This provided a lot of great feedback. This provided information that they could use then in the following year to share out in collaboration between grade levels, collaboration between all teachers that provided some information regarding what was working and then what might not have been working or what did they need additional support for. And this was an additional survey shared out within a secondary school. And they just wanted to gauge general belief systems and awareness as well. So you could see these initial questions here provided some information regarding the beliefs teachers might have had regarding behavior or outcomes or incentives as well.
As you engage in problem solving as a team, consider how you might involve your teachers in this process. Here is an example of a school that gathered their year-end data. They shared it then at grade level meetings and prompted teachers to suggest action steps. These suggestions were then consolidated and brought back to the PBIS team. Here's an example of collaboration between counselors at a middle school and elementary school feeder pattern as they reviewed SEL data. Here you see the SEL data that was reviewed by the middle school team. This was then brought to several of the feeder elementary schools in partnership with that middle school. Those elementary counselors then took time reviewing this SEL data, looking at some of the trends and identifying what was done to support areas of concern, as well as what still needed to be done. That information was then brought to their feeder middle school counselors, who then discussed how their feedback could inform needed support for the next school year. Based on that information, they decided to explore opportunities to introduce to all students strategies for recognition of emotion, as well as mindfulness resources, and also starting the year with greater intentionality, coordinating proactive small groups. Here's a great example of how one high school leveraged student involvement to engage teachers. First Colonial High School held a student panel discussion during Teacher Work Week, August of 2021. Approximately 25 students were seated in 2 rows facing out towards staff, and 3 groups of staff members rotated into the band room where the band director, who was also the PBIS team lead, facilitated conversations between students and staff. The facilitator welcomed everyone and briefly explained the session and the expectations and norms. Students who chose to participate raised their hand and kept responses brief and respectful. Staff generated and asked their own questions in an organic manner, and each session rotation lasted approximately 15 minutes. You'll see these are some of those questions that were prompted to start discussion between the groups. Here are some considerations to keep in mind that they shared as they engaged in this activity. It's important that the person leading the session has a good rapport with the students and is comfortable and able to steer and redirect the conversation as needed. When choosing students for your panel, consider choosing a group that's already around each other, usually, maybe a part of the same class or sports team. They may be already comfortable with the teacher or whoever is leading the panel as well. This helps the students feel more comfortable opening up and being more forthcoming. Student groups should be representative as well of the school student population. If possible, hold a practice session with the students a week or so prior to the actual event to familiarize them with the process. Feedback they received from the teachers after this panel session was that the teachers enjoyed it, and several expressed an interest afterward in extending the length of the session in order to have more opportunity to interact directly with the students for clarification. As we reflect on the role of teachers in PBIS implementation, it is important to recognize why this is such an important factor. We know everyone wants their voices to be heard and to know that they are a part of what helps decisions to be made in their school. Community is about feeling connected and responsible for what happens, with everyone playing a crucial role. Thank you for participating in this webinar. We hope the information shared here will benefit your work with PBIS.